So Elena joins us from London. To start off with, Elena, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and your musical upbringing and kind of introduce yourself to everybody?
Absolutely. So, as I'm sure you can hear, I am American. I was born in Hartford, Connecticut, but grew up primarily in the Philadelphia area. I started playing the violin at the age of 5. Actually, I was fortunate enough to be in a public school. Well, it would be called state school here, but in the States it's called public school. Um, that happened to have a strings program, a little, Suzuki program. So, after actually years of bugging my parents for a violin because I'd seen it on Sesame Street. Um, they relented at age 5, and I was lucky enough to begin Suzuki classes in my elementary school. Um, and from there, I moved to a private teacher, had private lessons in the Philadelphia area. When I was 12, I started doing youth orchestra and like sonata class and some rudimentary theory classes in Philadelphia, and then eventually made my way to the Curtis Institute of Music when I was 17, which was my dream all throughout childhood. So that felt very cool. I did some grad school at Juilliard in New York, then stayed in New York for 10 years. And then, well, fast forward, I met my now husband and started to work my way over to London more and more. And now that's where I reside.
Elena's husband is Tom Poster, the pianist, who is also your duo and music companion in many settings, isn't he?
He is, yes, and he was my duo partner before he was my husband. We actually met on a blind date, a musical blind date from 2012 to 2014. I was on the BBC Radio 3 New Generation Artist scheme. So I was coming over to London at that point. I'm still based in the States, so I was coming over to London quite a bit to play with the various BBC orchestras, do a lot of studio recording, and I was still primarily working with an American pianist who I still love dearly. But at a certain point, the BBC was, they got a little tired of uh, heeding my demands to fly over my American recital partner. So they said, "You'll play with someone here." For one session, and so they put me and Tom together. And at that point, we had totally different lives, so we didn't factor into each other's, you know, yeah, we
Yeah.
there was no funny business going on then. But it worked really well professionally, so much so that a couple of years later, I asked if he was available to do a recital at a festival, and then the ball got rolling.
Amazing. And it all works out swimmingly. It's interesting that you mentioned chain music, and I brought up Tom as your duo partner initially. Chain music's obviously played a pivotal role in your musical upbringing, and I guess it culminated in your involvement in various chamber music festivals, including Chamber Music by the Sea, which I read that you've just finished in August in Maryland. Can you tell us a little bit about that festival?
Yeah, so that is my own festival that I run in a tiny little town in the state of Maryland. It's where my parents have retired but lived. They've been going back and forth there for 20. Well, I've been going there for about 20 years. It's just a beautiful, beautiful little, uh, uh, yeah, not so well known corner of the United States, but it's a beautiful historic town with a huge emphasis on the visual arts. And when I started going regularly some years back, I sort of thought to myself, I wonder if classical music would have an audience here, because even though there was no classical music scene to speak of, there seem to be a receptiveness to the arts and other art forms. So in 2016, that was the first year that I put on like a tester version of the festival, and it was incredibly well received, and it's just grown little by little every year. We just celebrated our 8th season. It's a real kind of mom and pop operation, so literally my parents and I.
Ah,
It's mostly us just running everything from, figuring out where to put the musicians, to feeding them, to moving chairs on stage. We have help from a local education organization, which is amazing because it gets to the festival, helps them and they help us. So it's a really beautiful reciprocal arrangement. But yeah, it feels like in many ways one one culmination of my sort of lifelong love of chamber music. I just think it's so important for all musicians, no matter what you're doing with your life. If you're a soloist, if you're an orchestral musician, if you teach, I just think it's so important to play with other people, to arrive at decisions democratically. And it just feels really good to shape music all together. I think it's sort of like it can be just the perfect little microcosm for the rest of life.
When you were a child yourself, growing up and taking part in violin lessons and that sort of things, was it something that you were exposed to? Were you in the string quartets and things from an early age?
Yeah, my first chamber music group was when I was 11 or 12. I don't exactly know how that came to be, but I think, there were just a few teachers in the Philadelphia suburbs who were maybe in touch, or maybe someone was looking for a violinist for that age group, and I had zero experience at the time, but I got put in this piano trio, and we learned Beethoven trio very slowly, but it was beautiful. I thought it was so much fun, and the other two people I just loved them. I thought they played really well, and they were fun to be around, and I was like, this sure beats practicing by myself, like in my bedroom. Um, and then actually, I shortly thereafter began a weekend program at the prep division of a music college. So we had string orchestra rehearsals every week, but also we had string quartets. So we were all broken down into various chamber groups, and it just changed my life. I was by far the youngest member in the whole program that year, actually. But everyone was so kind to me. My chamber music colleagues were just really sweet and patient with me. My coach was lovely, and I still remember what I played. It was Mendelssohn Opus 13, the A minor quartet, and yeah, it was life changing. I just thought, like, all right, this is why music is so great.
I also read that earlier in the summer you were at the Seattle Chamber Music Festival, and with my journalistic head on, I read your Facebook post that said you didn't always feel like part of the family in the American chamber music tradition, but you had a great time this summer, I think I read. Can you tell us a little more about that and what you meant by that, and why being part of a family in a musical situation is so important to you?
Sure. I mean, I think it's not that I haven't felt at home in the chamber music tradition in the States. I mean, I would say some of my favorite ensembles are American. For example, sorry, my my 2-year-old is determined to make a cameo.
Don't apologize. Yeah.
He's just gotten out of the bath, so if you hear a little squeak, that is Pico. Um, what was I saying? Oh, yeah. So my favorite chamber ensemble, well, one of them, the Guarneri Quartet, is, I would say, sort of epitomizes a certain sort of American playing, just so warm and generous, and that's really the sound and aesthetic and tradition I was brought up on. But it's more that, like in any country or like in any place, and of course the United States is so huge, there are clubs, and people have sort of started chamber music societies or various festivals, and they invite their friends, and that's fine. I do the same thing. But after like lots of auditioning and lots of networking and many years having a fairly successful time as a concertizing musician in the States, and it still felt like I couldn't quite break into some of those clubs. I got a little fed up and was like, I'm going to make my own. So actually that was part of like a slight degree of vengefulness. I'm just kidding. No, I think it just sort of lit a fire under my butt, this idea of, well, okay, I should probably stop waiting to get invited and just make some stuff happen. So that was part of the genesis of my festival in Maryland. Part of the reason that Tom and I wanted to start our own collective, although he had his own personal reasons for wanting to start. We just sort of wanted to bring together all the people that we loved and form our own club, but one that is hopefully as inclusive feeling and accessible as possible. Oh, but Seattle, sorry.
Absolutely. Yeah. Oh yeah, go on.
Yeah, so I was nervous to go there, not because it had a reputation of being exclusive or unwelcoming, nothing like that. It was just that A lot of the regulars who were in attendance are people who are very much part of those clubs, and I was like, oh no, are they gonna like me? I'm so nervous. But actually, I learned, as these things often are, a lot of it was in my head, and actually everyone was incredibly nice and so fun to play with, and um, just a fantastic group of musicians. Oh my gosh, the level was bonkers. So it was a really, really positive experience.
It's interesting to hear you talking about those external pressures and those kind of anxious thoughts that we all have. It doesn't really matter, does it, whether you're a concert soloist or a beginner, or whatever music making you're doing. It's always these external things that are often more stressful than the notes themselves, I find.
Certainly, very few people in my close circle are immune to these sort of things. But actually, I think these things are really, really important to talk about amongst your colleagues and friends, but also to a wider audience. Like, maybe I know some of you out there, but maybe not, and it doesn't even matter, because I think, I mean, I hope to know you if I don't now, but I just think these are very human problems, insecurities and layers of spirally stuff that's going on in the brain. And I think the more we can be open and honest about it, maybe the better chance we have of it dissipating a little bit for us. So yeah, I wanted to be honest about that, because I was really nervous about going to Seattle and seeing these people who I so revered and was quite intimidated by, and they were all really nice. So
Thanks for your honesty there. I want to move back, I think, a month. I mean, a massive moment that we all read a lot about, saw a lot about, and maybe watched live or on TV in July. And that was Proms 7 with BBC National Orchestra Wales and Sam Coleridge-Taylor. And tell us about that performance and what it meant to you, and how was it?
oh my gosh, so much has happened since then that I have to remind myself that it wasn't a dream, because it feels quite surreal and like it happened in some sort of other life or parallel universe at this point. But from what I can recall, it was really a very spectacular day and night and experience. I mean, it was my second prom. Last year I played the Ethel Smythe Concerto for violin and horn with Ben Goldscheider. So who is a regular chamber music collaborator. So I felt like protected on stage, like I had my buddy with me. And actually, I wrote him in early July this year. I was like, Ben, I can't do this without you. Like, can you come on stage with me and just smile and be your lovely self? He was like, I think you're gonna be okay. Um, but yeah, I was scared. It was it's intimidating, just the idea of walking out into that massive space with so many eyes on you, especially because like the hoopla around the whole Proms Festival is so enormous and enthusiastic, and you think to yourself like, oh my god, these amazing people are all playing and giving these incredibly exciting concerts, and I have to do that, and how am I going to do that? But actually, the space is just so electric, the energy in there. And I was telling a friend who also just did a prom uh, that it actually feels less like a concert hall and more almost like a sporting arena. Not that I've, done sports in an arena, but like what I imagine a sporting arena would feel like. So I just tried to ride that wave, thinking like, oh yeah, I'm like I'm not going to make a sports analogy.
Oh,
That
go
is
on.
my comfort zone. Yeah, but just someone who's not a classical violinist, I'm going to be that, and I'm going to walk out and like have this rock star, whatever, more carefree energy, and actually that is easy to achieve in that space, because people are standing, they're sort of at your calf level. Um, the lights are cool. It's just such a cool atmosphere. So um, that has been my biggest takeaway, that it is a concert experience unlike really any in the regular classical music season. Um, and yeah, I mean, I love the Coleridge Taylor Concerto so much. It was I've played it a lot, so it felt as comfy as you can feel with the piece, in that sort of televised scenario. Um, it's just music I love, and it's the sort of piece where I feel like I can go on stage and with it say, let me tell you a story, like please come along on my journey, rather than being like, oh no, am I going to miss these octaves, so it feels like a very comfortable, like spiritually comfortable piece for me. So it was a very cool thing to get to share in that arena.
Amazing, yeah. And how did it feel playing a prom for the second time? I mean, did you benefit from that experience, or did it make it almost more nerve-wracking to go back and a year later?
Uh, I was glad to have had the experience, certainly, of last year. There were added elements this year. One, no Ben Goldscheider, sad. Two, it was televised, and I'd never done that before. So I think that really was playing the biggest tricks on my mind. The idea of course, once you're playing, or at least once I started playing, I luckily forgot about the cameras. They're quite good at their job, so it's not like they're in your face or anything. Um, but I just had it in my mind that somehow like that would be so much scarier, and it was, but it wasn't something I was thinking about as I was playing. But yes, I was definitely happy to have had one prom under my belt where I wasn't also thinking about like, can they see up my dress?
Yeah, again, the peripheral sort of all the noise that comes with a big performance like that, obviously,
Yeah.
at the
Yeah, and
forefront,
actually,
especially with the cameras there, I guess.
I don't know that this might not be interesting to anyone, but I was actually very stressed or like preoccupied beforehand in the weeks leading up about the idea of having my hair and makeup done. As you can see, I'm like I don't really do hair and makeup. I do the Zoom filter that makes you look a little smoother. Um, it's not something that's a part of my pre-concert routine, but I was like, do I hire someone? Are they going to provide it? Like, how much time is it going to take? Am I going to be like bored in the chair or whatever? But actually, it wound up being a really fun element of it, like getting pampered a little bit, just being forced to sit there, be still. I couldn't obsessively practice passages, and just having someone sort of take care of me in a calming way was really, really nice.
Elena's great with the segues because she talks about the Royal Albert Hall and getting into the mindset of that being a great sporting arena. Quite want to chat about your passion for yoga and movement and the idea. I've got a great quote from you, which I've written down. Many musicians, in their quest to fulfill the intellectual and emotional sides of their craft, overlook the more athletic components. I was quite taken by that because that mental side and that great athletes have, not to mention the actual pure physicality of playing an instrument, is something that I think's been overlooked for a long time. Can you tell us about how you feel about that movement and yoga and why it's important to you?
Yeah, so I found my way to yoga sort of accidentally. I wasn't in search. Well, I didn't seek it out, sort of to provide any answers or solutions to my violin playing queries or issues. I made my way to a hot yoga class honestly because I was heartbroken. I was like going through a really sticky personal patch, and I remembered that a fellow violinist had mentioned this particular practice of hot yoga once, and thought, oh, that sounds. I thought like that sounds really intense, and maybe it'll make me stop crying for a few minutes. And it did. So yeah, I went to a hot yoga class in Lower Manhattan, and I was hooked right away. It was probably the hardest thing I'd ever done physically, just the concentration and the temperature. And I did not do any sports growing up. I was always scared of damaging my hands, and in general, I was just more of an inside kid, as they say. But this made me feel strong, actually, for the first time, maybe ever. And I went back and I went back, and it was really hard, but it was so rewarding. I just felt good physically. And for those 90-minute chunks, I wasn't thinking about, this stupid boy. So that was great. And then sort of over the next few weeks, I started like I said, by accident, noticing some cool effects it was having on my playing. Like I noticed I didn't have to drill things so many times. Like if I practice something, 2 or 3 times rather than whatever I was doing before that, let's say 12, they just sort of worked better, and like my muscles felt looser. I started noticing things like how I was balancing my weight between my 2 feet, what I was doing with my hips, and I just became aware of like things I was doing in other parts of my body and the effects that those movements or those positions had all the way up here. I think, at least in my experience, violin training was very much focused around, the arms, the shoulders, the head. Rarely went below like here. So actually, to be thinking about the body in a holistic way, or just like as one complete unit, was really revelatory. Um, and yeah, just sort of very quickly started to change my physical relationship to the violin, which is something that I always struggled with. I always envied those players who seemed like it was effortless, or their bodies just sort of melted around the instruments, and it always felt kind of bad for me until I started doing yoga, and I was like, oh yeah, this is like more what I've aspired to my whole life. And then, as it so happened, one of my best friends had also discovered this same yoga practice around the same time, and we just started chatting about the positive influence it was having on our lives and on our relationships to the violin. And we started practicing together whenever we were in the same city, and just chatting about how much we wished we had had this sort of mindful movement component to our own violin training, in our formative years, teenage and college. We just started daydreaming about ways we might be able to make that happen in some form or another. And over a few years, well, many years and many conversations, our program Intermission was born. So now a big chunk of our lives is devoted to sharing ideas like, move yoga, yes, but also ways to align the body, not in a way that, well, basically having people find their own personal version of neutral, so that then they can welcome their instruments into that neutral rather than sort of compromising their bodies in order to serve the instruments. We believe it should be the other way around. You invite the instrument into your space. Finding ways of encouraging people to explore that. Thinking about breathing as a really, really helpful tool for string instruments. Well, all music making, but string instruments is what we know best. Talking a lot about the the meditative side of things, both in movement and in stillness, and how that can help us with things like nerves, performance anxiety, focus, and just sort of putting all the pieces together. So combining basically like mind, body, spirit / emotions, however you like to think of it, and music as sort of one complete process, rather than having, playing your instrument over here and then mental health over here and then physical health, just having music making feel like just a complete involvement from all aspects of our humanity.
Yeah, it's fantastic. It sounds like a really holistic approach to music making in general. And if anyone's interested, I will send an email around probably tomorrow, but you can head to intermissionsessions.com to find out a bit more, or on socials. Yeah, I just wonder, I remember at the ESTA conference back in April, there's an Australian educator and violinist called Rupert Gwenther who came over and did some wellness sessions in the morning. And one thing I was struck by with him was his insistence that with meditation, you could just do 2 minutes when you're queuing up for your lunch, or 2 minutes when you're waiting for the toilet to be free, or 2 minutes when you're about to get on a bus. And the idea that cumulatively over the course of a day, you might have done 20 minutes meditating without even thinking about it. And I wonder whether that idea is something that we could explore a little bit now. I don't want to put you on the spot, but whether there's a particular sort of exercise or movement that might be good for between students, between lessons, or that sort of thing, just to kind of rebalance or anything like that. If you've got any sort of top tips for us.
Completely. Well, I mean, from a very basic physical perspective, if we're playing an instrument, we're using our hands. So I would say hand, finger, wrist health is really important. And so something that I catch myself doing all the time, waiting for the toilet, in line for the grocery store, in during rests on stage, is just rolling out my wrists. So I just make 2 gentle fists and start circling them out. This is good if you don't play an instrument. We're all on the devices, on our phones, on our computers, driving. So just putting a little lubrication in our joints is super important. And switch directions if you haven't already. Ooh, mine are chatty tonight.
I was just going to say, I'm glad I put myself on mute there. There's a good reason for that. There's a lot of clicking. I'm going to go back on mute.
Yeah, and you can do a variation of this, interlacing all 10 fingers, doing the wrists together. I've actually, full disclosure, got a little bit of left wrist pain, so this one is slightly painful for me right now. But another thing that we really hope to make people aware of through our work with intermission is acknowledging when you're in pain, when you're tired, when rest would be more productive than pushing through. So I think, for decades, not a lot of us have spoken up about that, certainly to our private teachers, to society. We're afraid we're going to lose work, we're afraid of looking weak, but I think being honest about, again, taboo subjects is so important, because everyone has experienced some version of it. And then another thing I like to do, just to wake up the wrists, is to wave hi, and then wave come here, or it's hot, which it definitely is, and then get down. Shake it out. Yeah, and even just something super simple like that can bring increased blood flow to the area. It's not cold right now, but it will often be cold in England, in a practice room. So just making sure the muscles are awake and energized and the blood is flowing. I think that is so important, just on such a basic level.
That sort of exercise, of course, whilst being great for us, is obviously really great for students and kind of like an icebreaker at the beginning of a lesson, I'm sure.
The amount of stuff I do with my hands before I even open the case, it's probably spend more time doing that actually with the instrument. But for me, that is infinitely more productive. Stretching and making sure my hands are ready. I'm just saying hands, but like it really should be the whole body. Doing that is, in the long run, so much more productive than taking the violin out, being cold, being tight, and like drilling something a million times, which will probably just result in me being hurt and cranky.
We're really delighted that Elena's joining us for another great chamber music festival, which is the Hatfield House Chamber Music Festival, which is curated by the ESTA UK president, Guy Johnston, who is a friend of yours, part of your sort of family, if you like, of musical colleagues. And you're going to kick off the day, I believe, with a sort of movement session. Do you want to give us an insight into what people may experience if they sign up to come along on that day?
Yeah, so I mean, I like to tailor these things to whoever is actually there. So I'll probably ask at the beginning of class, just get a sense of who's in the room, whether it's people who are playing all the time, people who aren't playing but who are curious, what hurts, what needs stretching, how active people want to be versus still and relaxed and gentle. But any way you slice it, it's going to be movement that will benefit musicians, which also benefits all humans. just some very accessible, don't be scared. It won't be anything pretzel-y. Just starting to explore the idea of connecting breath to movement and how that can eventually extend to music. Doing some breathing exercises to expand our internal landscape, some nice, yummy movements that will hopefully address most of the major areas of the body. Depending on the space, we might be able to get down onto the floor. If not, we can do mostly standing. So it should all just be, things that feel good, both physically and hopefully mentally. Try and calm the noise a little bit. And we can always have a chat afterwards if there are any questions about specific things.
Definitely. We'll make sure there's time for that. I can't believe that there will be anyone in this webinar that hasn't seen the event on socials, but you never know. The Invisible Force, it's going to be a great day as part of the Hatfield House Chamber Music Festival. So just head to the ESTA UK website or our socials and you'll find out more about that. It's Saturday, the 30th of September. So it's coming up pretty fast. It would mean a lot if you booked soon. It would calm my nerves. It would be lovely to know that we're going to have a great day, lots of people. We've got one question from Sophia, who says, could you talk a little about getting your yoga certification? So I guess that means your 200 hours, is that right?
Yes. So I did my 200-hour certification in June of 2019 at a place called Kripalu Center in Massachusetts, which actually on a personal level wound up being unbelievably fulfilling because that is where my probably greatest mentor, Joseph Silverstein, the violinist, lived, and his wife still lives there. It's very close to Tanglewood, which was a big part of my toddlerhood. So I was actually living in Mr. Silverstein's house and then commuting for my training each day. So it was really, really special, and it felt like just the most intense example of all of this stuff being connected, yoga and music and everything kind of aligning in this way. But the Kripalu training was fantastic. It's just such a solid, excuse me, method where, the yoga, I had done so much yoga before that actually the particular sequence that they teach for us to teach is fairly basic. There's not a lot of like weird sequencing involved. It's just like great accessible postures. But what they really teach is how to teach, which is a skill that can obviously be applied to anything, not just yoga. I think it's informed my violin teaching with just some really beautiful basic principles of teaching from the ground up. So literally, first cue the feet, then cue the knee, then cue the hips, blah, blah. But on a sort of more metaphorical level, it's such great advice. Just think about, build your house properly. And just always to, like, they really stress compassion and inclusivity and gentleness. And yeah, there is a lot of yoga out there and movement in general that's quite brutal and I don't know, unkind sometimes. It seems like an oxymoron. It seems like all yoga should be pretty nice, but there are some weird teachers out there. But I would say my training was incredibly lovely and warm and really put the individual at the center of things rather than any one teacher's methodology, which again I think is really important for any sort of teaching.
Of course. I
mean, my personal opinion is that if a teacher is really negative and is starting from a place of no, it's just lazy. It means that they're thinking about themselves and their own sort of arbitrary set of expectations rather than meeting the student where they are, and helping elevate them no matter what's there. So I think that is something that I got to explore at Kripalu, and I'm very grateful for that.
Listen, everyone, thanks so much for joining us, and especially thanks to Elena for joining us and putting up with my internet gremlins and sticking with us. It's been a joy to chat to you.
Thank you so much for having me. And it's entirely possible it was my internet also.
We can fight that out amongst ourselves afterwards.